Welcome, good evening. My name is Sid Espinoza, former council member and mayor here in Palo Alto, and thrilled to have so many people show up tonight. This is the first in a series of conversations that we'll be having in this community about who we are, where we're going, how we're growing, what we might be in the future. And so there was a question mark around how many people would show. Some people thought 10, 20. We have blown those numbers out. There are a few seats still empty, so if people are standing, there's some on the side here, a few over here, I encourage you to find a seat. We will be having first a few words from our mayor, then we'll be hearing from Elliot Margolis, who has an incredible project to share. Then we have a panel that we'll be hearing from, but we really want this to be a dialogue. And so after we engage the panel, we'll be reaching out to the audience and really want to hear from you, both what's important, questions from the panelists, et cetera. We will be filming this, and so you'll be able to find it online later. There will not be PowerPoints. These aren't amplification mics, though, just so you know when you speak into it for a question, they're for that recording. And without further ado, let me turn it over to our mayor now so we can get started. Nancy Shepard.
Thank you, Sid, and welcome tonight. I see Gail Price and Greg Schmidt here from Council, and so we are eager to get the Our Palo Alto series started, and so happy to see Elliot Margolis join us with the Made in America. As you know, this is a very interesting time in our city, and we are working to strike that right balance between a place to grow companies and being a place to grow families. Today, our city is wrestling with the challenges that come with a dynamic local economy and a vibrant technology overlay while still maintaining that small town community feel. It is also important to launch a new approach to how we talk as a community about these very important issues. Tonight, we are kicking off what we hope is the first in many community conversations that will be part of the Our Palo Alto story. We want to reach beyond City Hall to have these conversations about important issues across our community in neighborhoods, businesses, schools, community centers, and anywhere else where friends and neighbors might meet. Ultimately, our goal is to engage citizens from all walks of life in a discussion about the future of our city. One way to start is by asking the question, who are we? That's what we are here to talk about tonight. What is our population going to look like over the next decades, and how will that impact the decisions we make? We are very glad to have you with us tonight and look forward to a lively discussion. We also hope that you have signed in, and we want to get your email addresses. At this time, I would like to turn it over to Elliot, who can explain the Made in America series that we wanted to also incorporate into our storytelling about Palo Alto. Elliot.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm Elliot Margolis. I'm with the Mid-Peninsula Community Media Center, and we run a project called Made into America. You know, we Palo Altans, we have a neighbor, Al Kuhn, and he escaped from Nazi Germany with his parents, and he was a child, he was allowed to bring one toy with him. He chose his 100-piece erector set, and over the next 9 years, when the family was in Bolivia, he made countless designs. And then years later, as an American citizen, he became part of the team that designed the lunar landing module. We also have two Palo Altans who didn't even know about each other that both trace their lineage back to a Stukely Westcott. Am I standing in front? This is the website behind me you'll be seeing as I speak. Now, Stukely came over with the Puritans back in 1635 to Salem, Massachusetts. And a few years later, he was kicked out of the state. The Puritans said to him, you better go live with your free thinker friend, Roger Williams, in Rhode Island. And that's what he did. And I don't know, maybe Bob Moss, you remember the City Cafe on 168 University Avenue? Okay, so the cook there was Fern Mock, and she passed away in 1998 at the age of 100 in Palo Alto. But few people probably know that in 1926, she had to fool the inspectors at Angel Island who were enforcing the Chinese Exclusion Act. And she had to convince them that she was really the daughter of an American citizen. And she was successful, and You saw her at the cafe where she was the cook. Now, an adventurous scientist in Japan brought his family to the United States in '61. And his very shy daughter started first grade, started learning English, and decades later became our first Asian American mayor, Yoriko Kishimoto. And these are the kinds of stories you're going to find on our website. They are part of this project that I mentioned before. And, you know, in the Silicon Valley, 1/3 of our population are recent immigrants. And fully a half, or nearly a half, of our workforce are foreign-born. And 2/3 of everyone under 18 are children of immigrants. So as we kick off our Palo Alto tonight, our Palo Alto initiative tonight, we're going to draw on our opinions of housing and schools and job growth, all these things that we have very strong opinions about. We'll be engaged in vigorous debates. And while that's so important to bring the passion to these discussions, I think it would be a great exercise if everybody went to this website and learned a little bit about each other's history. Because in those diverse and compelling stories, you're going to find a lot of the shared values that we have around family, around hard work, and opportunities for all of us. So here's our website. If you went to the search box at the top and wrote in Palo Alto, you'd come up with dozens of stories. And if there's other ways you can search the website, you can do it by keywords, you can do it by countries of origin. And I think on a deep level, when you read these stories, you're going to see the kind of courage it takes to bring your family and start a whole new future. And isn't that the kind of ethos that we want for our Palo Alto as we build our future and use our courage and shared values? So we hope, this is the pitch that's really important to me, we hope you will share your family story on our archive. And I'm going to mention 3 things you could do tonight after the panel discussion. One of them is you could sign our contact sheet, our sign-up sheet, and that means one of our volunteers will contact you in the next few weeks and set up a short interview and then write up your family story, get a picture, and have a posting on the archive. Number 2, the library and the city have brought a few Chromebooks that we'll have set up over there, or if you brought your own laptops, we will have them set up to the page where you can enter your own account and save a draft if you're not done tonight. And number 3, the last one, there's 4 of us here, volunteers and me, and we would love to interview some of you from 8 to 8:20 tonight after the panel discussion over on that side of the library. So we'll be standing there waiting to interview anybody who's willing to talk to us and be part of the archive. We assume that, or it's already in the works, that this archive will be used by many Palo Alto students in history and social science classes, and we're building a traveling exhibit to go around the libraries out of this. So thanks so much for taking some time to be part of it.
Thank you very much. If I can get the panelists to join me up front. First, let me point out that you should have received a packet as you came in. If you have not, you can get one on the way out. In there is very helpful information, that some of which will be referenced by our panelists. Okay, thank you. That's helpful too. Let me know if you can't hear. There are packets of information, both with bios of our panelists, but also information that they'll be referencing, some of the data that they'll be referencing. So be sure that you get one of those packets. If you are doing social media tonight, hashtag #Palo Alto is the reference that you should be using. And if you are looking for follow-up information, want to share the video later when it's posted, you'll be able to find that at www.cityofpaloalto.org/#Palo Alto. This is an important dialogue for this community to have, to really understand as we start these series of conversations who we are. I think sometimes there are misconceptions in this community about the makeup of our citizenry, the professionals who work here during the day, as well as the people who live here. And what's great is to be able to bring together some experts who really have looked into the data deeply from several different perspectives and share that as we start this conversation. I'm going to use my notes so that I don't mess up their bios in any way as I do this, but just a few words on their background, and then I'll have them speak a little bit more about their backgrounds and approach to the data that we'll be talking about. Stephen Levy is the director and senior economist of the Center for Continuing Study of the California Economy, which is a private research organization founded in 1969 to provide an independent assessment of economic and demographic trends in California. And Duncan, who many of you may know as the Chief Technology Officer for the Palo Alto Unified School District, was recently nominated by President Obama to become the Assistant Administrator for Environment Information and the CIO at the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And David Evan Harris is a social change agent at the well-known Institute for the Future, located here in downtown Palo Alto, and is a member of the 10-year Forecast and the Governance Futures Lab core teams. So without further ado, let's turn to our panel and hear from them directly. We're going to start with just a little bit about each of your background. If you can tell us about your approach to defining the identity of this community. This is a chance to tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got here, but also to help frame and give us your lens for how you analyze the present and look into the future. Stephen?
Okay. I'm a resident. I live now about a block from here. I can't. Well, we're all going to have to try and be patient. I don't have the energy to scream. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, I don't know what to do about that. I'm not feeling like screaming. I've worked downtown for 45 years. As Sid said, my major work involves providing long-term projections, number of people, number of jobs, what kind of households, for big public agencies like utilities and water districts and regional planning agencies. Our children went to school in Palo Alto. We've been here about 50 years. I don't know, Sid, was I supposed to go through the data on the first round or just who I am?
Just telling us about your background and how you approach data analysis.
Sure. Well, my workday is about telling mainly big public agencies about the future growth in jobs, which drives the growth in population, which leads to the demand for housing. That's what I do. I also do, not related to this, a lot of workforce planning for both workforce boards and companies. So those are my two interests. I've written a memo, which you all have, and which I think Hillary will make public, so I don't have to do a lot of reading and you don't have to do a lot of note-taking about who we are in terms of demographics and jobs.
Thank you. And we actually don't need this mic because that one is picking us up and this doesn't amplify. So I would just pull that. So we can just speak to the audience.
There are also a few seats in the front row.
Yeah, there are a few seats in the front. People are standing in the back.
Okay, so as Sid mentioned, I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the Palo Alto Unified School District. Prior to joining the district, I worked for HP for almost 20 years in Vancouver, Washington, and Boise, Idaho. And I guess my role as Chief Technology Officer wouldn't really lead you to believe that I'd be doing the demographic planning for the district. I'm an industrial engineer by education, so that the things about probability, statistics, forecasting, and mathematical modeling are really core to what industrial engineers do. And even after I became a manager, I stayed involved in mathematical modeling as sort of a professional interest. So when Bob Galton reduced his work hours, it was pretty logical to ask me to take over the demographic planning for the district. In my enrollment planning roles, I'm responsible for enrollment forecasting. So I look at the trends from year to year and over longer time horizons. I don't look at the day-to-day placement of students. I don't look at decisions to open or close classes in any given year, although sometimes they'll ask me specifically about my thoughts on that. And when we look at enrollment planning as a district, we have two concerns: how many students we have and where those students are going to be. We find at the macro level, the number of incoming kindergarten students is a strong indicator of the overall growth of the district over time. Consequently, our biggest concern, and often the hardest thing to predict, is how many kindergarten kids we're going to get in any given year. Once we know that, we have a pretty good idea how big the cohort's going to be over the 13 years they're with us. So regardless of the number of students we have in total, our other concern is making sure that the student locations and school capacities match up. And this is also quite difficult to predict. So that's the background for what I do.
Thanks. My name is David Harris, and I work at the Institute for the Future here in Palo Alto, as Sid mentioned. How many of you are familiar with the Institute for the Future? Can I see?
Only by walking by.
Only by walking by, okay. Well, that's good to know. So for those of you, it looks like about half and half. For those of you who aren't familiar, the Institute is actually in our 46th year. We've been in Palo Alto for the last 10. We were on Sand Hill Road, not far from Palo Alto, just before that. And we're actually just moving into a new space. We're moving from 124 University to 201 Hamilton right now. We're moving into actually a more open space. We're going to have a storefront, and actually I just spent the better part of the afternoon setting up our first exhibit at the Gallery for the Future, which is part of the new Institute for the Future space. It's an exhibit of video documentary artwork that I do called the Global Lives Project, and you'll all be able to see that if you're walking down Emerson at any point over the next couple of weeks. It's 8 big screen TVs, each of which will show the daily life of different people from all over the world. So at the Institute for the Future, I'm trained as a sociologist. That's what I did my graduate work in, and this will be my 7th year at the Institute. The approach that we bring as people who study and think about the future and actively attempt to make the future that we want to see, revolves around a series of different methodologies. We have at the Institute people with backgrounds in pretty much every social science discipline you can think of, a number of people with technology backgrounds, engineers, designers, artists, and I, of course, particularly bring that sociological lens. In addition to being, I think, filling that professionals who work in Palo Alto category, I also hold the claim at the Institute for the Future of having the closest point of origin to the office. I was born at Stanford Hospital, and I lived on Walter Hayes Drive for a couple of years as a kid. I went to preschool in Palo Alto, and I actually now live in San Francisco, but I come here very frequently on Caltrain. So yeah, there's the background.
Thank you. Well, let's dive in. Stephen, you referenced a
Question? How are you funded?
Is that, do you take that right now? So the Institute for the Future, so we're about 40 full-time staff, and we work on a lot of different projects in any given year. So in any given year, we have upwards of 100 to even 200 different funders. It's a variety of sources that come from private foundations, government grants, large corporations that sponsor the different parts of our work. It's a pretty diverse set of funders. But we don't have an endowment, but we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization.
And just for the record, that was a question about how they are funded. If we have questions from the audience, we have people with the mics, so make sure you say it in there so we get it on the system. So let's dive in, if we might.
Sure.
Stephen, you had referenced a memo that you wrote to the council, which people have in their packets, It was one of the most enlightening pieces that I've read in a while in terms of deep, solid data into who we are numbers-wise. You've looked a lot at neighboring communities and the county as a whole. Are we different from our neighbors, and what are some of the highlights of that data?
Okay, there are 4 differences. You probably all know them when I say them. Probably the starkest difference, which I didn't know till I looked at the data, is that we're older in the sense that we have 70% of our population is over 65, and the norm for the neighboring cities and the region is about 11%. Second, we are more affluent. We have higher income and higher housing prices and rents. We have lower poverty rates and lower unemployment rates. It's not to say that there aren't people in difficulty in Palo Alto, but overall, we have a pattern of affluence and lack of poverty that's pretty different than the neighboring communities. What's going to change in that's important for the comp plan discussion is that we, like every other community, is going to get older. Many of those 17% who are over 65 will be here in 2030 when the comp plan target date is, but the whole baby boom cohort is about to move into that age group. The baby boom started in 1947 and ended in 1963, so most baby boomers who live in Palo Alto and are raising kids and living in homes are going to be over 65 by the time the comp plan is ended. That's one piece. Where are we the same that might be interesting? Well, Elliot stole my thunder, but it's a really, really important point. Virtually all of the growth, well, more than all of the growth in Palo Alto in the past 15 years, but also for all of the other cities, has been in the foreign-born population. Here, primarily Asian, throughout the Bay Area, primarily Asian and Latino. And that is going to continue. Virtually all of the population growth in the region and the state is either going to be immigrants or the children and grandchildren of immigrants, as Elliot said. We have about an average share of folks who are Asian, an average share of folks who are foreign-born, but it's about a third of the population, and it's going to grow. Couple of other things that are the same, but people don't really recognize it. About 3 in 10 families in Palo Alto, 3 in 10 households have kids. So 7 in 10 households don't have kids in school. Family, because there's a lot of talk in the media and at council about family-friendly environment. You should know that my wife and I are a family. A family is the young man who unfortunately got divorced and his young son who lived in our condo, as well as the families that have children. Okay? We're about the same in that. 3 in 10 households have kids, 7 in 10 don't. Between 4 and 5 out of 10 households rent. We're about the same as the average, but that's a large number of renters. But more importantly, between 4 and 5 out of every housing unit in Palo Alto is multifamily. The renters might not go up, but the multifamily share will go up, because 8 in 10 housing units built anywhere in this county are multifamily, because that's what's going to be built. So the image that we are, or that any of our neighboring communities are, with the exception of a couple of small communities, are single-family dwelling unit communities where everybody has kids in school, is factually incorrect. Okay, it's just not right. The other area that's really different, and it's pretty contentious as far as the comp plan, and David's going to talk a lot about why that is that we have a ton of jobs. And you all know the bad side, which is that we have traffic and construction and all sorts of stuff all over the place in Palo Alto. You probably don't keep in mind The other side, which is the good side, is that we have a lot of money that those businesses are paying in property taxes to the schools and in taxes around. I'm not telling you what to do, but we have the largest number of jobs relative to our city size of any city in the state of California. None of those trends are going to change. We're going to get older, we're going to stay affluent. Most of the units built anywhere are multifamily, and the proportion of the population that is Asian and Latino and foreign-born is going to grow. That's a summary.
I'm sure there are lots of questions, but I want to make sure we hear from everybody, so let's keep going. We will have time for questions for everybody. And we've been talking here about a comparison with other cities, within the county, within the state. So much of your work focuses on neighborhoods within Palo Alto and understanding shifts that are happening there and some of those trends. So as we seek to understand who we are as Palo Alto, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, and I'm going to read some of this data to make sure I get it right. And I want to start with the big picture for the district. Many of you know that Palo Alto schools have been through a lot of changes in about the last 50 years. Enrollment in the district peaked in 1967-68 school year at 15,575 kids. It bottomed out in 1989-90 at 7,452 kids. So right now, in 2013-14, we have 12,481 students. So we're near the peak, but still several thousand students away. And it appears that our growth is flattening out a bit at this point. Obviously, there are a lot more people in Palo Alto now than there were in 1967, and we've talked a bit of why we have fewer students. You're definitely going to find a higher percentage of students, houses with students in 1967 if you were to go back and look at that data, and probably more students per household as well. We know there's some significant demographic trends in our society and in general in California and in Palo Alto that are impacting the enrollment. But we have to look back and see the impacts of Prop 13 and the baby bust on our enrollment to understand what happened. But where are we going forward? Is enrollment flattening out? Have we reached a peak? Are we heading towards a decline? There are some charts in your material that you might find of interest, and the first one shows they look like roller coasters. We refer to them as a roller coaster sometimes. The first one will show you the number of students we actually have over the last about 60 years. The second one will show you actuals, and then the last 14 years as projections, and that was a projection developed in about 2000. And the third one is a little hard to see, but it overlays those two. And one of the interesting data points there is that where we are now is actually within the range of projections that was created 15 years ago. So it's fairly easy to predict when you start looking, when the line continues to go in the same direction, right? You're going up, it's fairly easy to get in the right range for the district. The challenge is what happens when you reach the inflection point, when you flatten out. That's what's hard to predict. So keeping all that in mind, to your question, we think very local a lot of the time, right? Palo Alto used to have 22 small elementary schools. Average enrollment was 325. We now have 12 elementary schools with an average enrollment of 481. It's very different than it was when the enrollment peaked. And there's a map of those schools in your packet as well. It should probably follow those charts. And it shows the 12 elementary schools. And you can see that we have a north cluster with 3 schools. That's where Addison, Duveneck, and Hayes are. A south cluster, and there are 5 schools there. 3 of them are choice schools. And then there are 2 of them, two choice schools, 3 neighborhood schools. And then the west cluster, which goes along the west side of the district with 4 schools in it. And we try and keep students assigned to their neighborhood school. But if we can't keep them assigned to their neighborhood school, we try and put them in those clusters so that they don't get too far away from home. So we spend a lot of time looking at specific school enrollment and specific cluster enrollment to try and make sure we have the right capacity to match where the kids are. For example, some of you may know we recently shifted the boundary between Walter Hayes and Addison because we were seeing growth in Addison and decline in Walter Hayes, and so we moved that around. And that never is a popular thing, right? There's always some family that's unhappy with that arrangement. But it was successful, and this last couple of years we haven't had to overflow kids out of Addison, so that was a win. We have a lot of constraints when we look at clusters. The boundary between the north and south clusters is fixed because our school board is committed not to have students have boundaries traverse Oregon Expressway. So the boundaries have to be split by Oregon Expressway. Between the west and the north and south, we have some flexibility because we will shift kids across Alma and El Camino. But in the west, that cluster is divided by Page Mill, and we don't want to move kids from the north of Page Mill to the south and vice versa. So you can see there's a lot of challenges when we try and plan for growth. School locations are where they are, and it takes at least 5 years to select a school site and build one. And our school sites are limited either where we own land or where we can buy land. And in Palo Alto, there aren't a lot of places where we can buy land. So most of our growth management comes from shifting individual school attendance boundaries. And we are committed to keeping kids in a school once they start and keeping their siblings in that school, which means if we do shift a boundary change, it takes a very long time for it to flow through the system. Right? Kid starts in kindergarten, we shift the boundary the next year, that kid stays all the way through their elementary school career. So all of this is a way of telling you that we're very interested in population shifts within the cluster and the neighborhoods, and that's what I'm going to tell you a little bit about is what those look like. So you can't disregard that roller coaster graph when you look at neighborhoods, and that's why I brought it up. It's showing us really the population of kids with school-age families ramped up, it dropped, it ramped up again, and we know that's because people stay put in their homes, right, until they age out to a retirement home, or unfortunately they pass away, or pass that land down to their children. So we see some ongoing instability in enrollment because people don't move out. They stick around and their kids age out of the system. But each cluster is somewhat independent. In the north cluster, there's a greater number of owner-occupied single-family homes, except for the downtown area, which confuses the north cluster a little bit. And there's not a lot of new construction. The largest component is aging out of elementary school in the north cluster. So we've now started to see in the north cluster a decline in elementary school enrollment. We have empty seats at all the north cluster schools now. We're dropping the number of kindergartens at the north cluster schools. The south cluster is a little more transient than the north cluster. There's a much higher density of students in the neighborhoods in the south cluster. But this year we saw a substantial drop-off in new kindergarten students registering for the south cluster, and our demographers predicted this, and we thought it was kind of odd, but they hit it right on the nose. So we're now seeing the south cluster follow the north cluster and starting to have some enrollment drops as these families age, as their kids age, and the families stay put. The west cluster is really interesting because it includes El Camino corridor, includes Stanford. This is where new housing is being created in the district primarily, both on campus with Stanford and off campus. If you look at where developments, we're thinking about the Fry's area, many of the major new developments are right in the El Camino corridor. So it's also a little more transient. You have young families come into Stanford and into the community, and then they may leave after a few years. So there are a lot more small children and families that move out. So right now, enrollment in the south part, which is Burns and Barron Park, is pretty soft. But we're already seeing space at Escondido and Nixon, which is near Stanford, really getting tight. And with new Stanford development is causing us some real challenges. And we anticipate with the development expected in the El Camino corridor that we're going to see a lot of stress on the west cluster in the coming years. And that's going to be the area where the district is going to struggle to provide enough space for kids. So that's elementary schools. In a lot of ways, middle and high schools are a lot simpler. We're a lot less constrained by our local locations. At the same time, our middle schools are challenging right now. We tend to lose some kids after elementary school to private schools. But we have some really large classes coming through middle school. And Terman is small, and a lot of the west cluster feeds into Terman. So we anticipate Terman basically being full for the next few years until our current first grade class shows up, which is the first of our smaller classes flowing through the system. And that may shift some kids who should be at Terman over to JLS. And we would like to have another middle school, and we can't figure out where to put one or how to get land for one. So that's a huge challenge for us. High school is relatively easy. We are able to balance the size of the schools primarily through inter-district transfers that are requested by kids, intra-district transfers requested by students, and occasionally we'll have to close one of the schools to ninth grade enrollment because say they get unbalanced and we don't have enough science labs or something like that. But they stay pretty balanced. And we have lots of room for high school kids on our 2 campuses right at the moment. So that's sort of the picture we see of the district at this point from the neighborhood standpoint.
Thank you. David, you've spent a lot of time thinking about the tech industry and Palo Alto and how they relate to each other. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, some of the data there that's interesting to you, and what you think that means for the future of Palo Alto.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was a really interesting provocation earlier to think about Palo Alto as a great place to raise a family and a great place to grow a company, and that is a lot of what what we think about and what we end up talking about when we have visitors at the Institute for the Future. We actually very regularly, a couple times a week, have groups, often delegations from either foreign governments or companies from other parts of the country or the world that come to the Institute for the Future to talk about innovation. And somehow word got out that we know the recipe for the secret sauce for innovation. And part of that is being here in Palo Alto. And people come here, and just in the last couple of years, I've given walking tours of downtown to groups from Finland, Dubai, France, Singapore, Mexico, and the tours have the usual stops: the HP Garage, the Android and Google offices. You know the drill. You guys have all been around here a lot, and that tour is really interesting for a lot of those people because there aren't a lot of towns that look and feel like Palo Alto out there in other parts of the world. And I think that Palo Alto, in addition to having all of this these great startups that are doing incredible innovation, also has some longer standing institutions in the area and some people who are more deeply committed to the character of the city. And as I mentioned before, I'm a little bit of an interloper here, except that I work here. But I went to Mountain View High School, but I had a teacher, Sarah Good. Some of you probably know her. She was my math teacher, and she lived in Palo Alto, but she taught in Mountain View. And she explained to me that she really preferred Palo Alto because Los Altos, Mountain View were more just about wealth. And Palo Alto had the wealth, but it was also an intellectual city. And a place where people were really into thinking and debate. And part of that was Stanford, and part of that was just the character of the city, not necessarily the university. And I think that actually that thought and that idea has really stuck with me over the years. And during this past year, the Institute for the Future had a 10-year lease on our current space that we're leaving, and we went through a long and deep deliberative process of deciding, should the Institute for the Future stay in Palo Alto, or should we move? Should we move to Redwood City? Should we move to San Francisco? What are the other places that we want to be? And there were a lot of factors that went into that decision. One thing I would flag for all of you, which you're probably not surprised to hear, that most of the people who work at the Institute who are under, say, 35, and I just barely fall into that category, live in San Francisco and commute down to Palo Alto. Right? That fits with the demographic character of the city. But so that was a big debate. What? And the buses. Yeah, the buses are an interesting one. And that's. I lived in the Mission until recently, when I was evicted from my apartment in the Mission in San Francisco. And so I think a lot of you have heard that story. And as a nonprofit worker who was living in the Mission, I could very easily have fallen onto one side of that debate, but I wasn't out there protesting or anything. That said, there is a concern that Palo Alto could have some of those similar dynamics to what's going on in San Francisco right now, of the city being very polarized by the longtime residents, who are the people that keep that intellectual character of the city alive, that keep the idea of Palo Alto as a great place to raise a family, not just a great place to grow a business. That community, I think, is not necessarily always complemented by the business hub here. I think that could be a tension. And it may be a productive tension over the years. I mean, no one's going to complain that there are too many jobs here. or maybe some of you will, maybe, right? But I, but I think, right? I mean, maybe that's an important question for the future of this city. And I think that divide also could be summed up as a divide between University Avenue and, to a certain extent, California Avenue and the rest of the city, right? I mean, because it's so different. You just walk a few blocks off of those two streets and you see the other Palo Alto that is not startup land, right? And maybe it is in some garages still. So I think one of the other tensions that I think Palo Alto will really have to think carefully about as the city grows and as the city continues to have growth in the tech industry, is a tension that I also experienced growing up in this area, which is how will you raise children who don't feel like just because they don't have a Porsche, they're not poor, right? I think for me that was a difficult part of growing up in this area, was that there's so much wealth and so much conspicuous consumption that the values of this community, the values that make Palo Alto, I think, what it is. I think there is an interesting and important countercultural current that is still part of the cyber culture of Palo Alto and that intellectual character. And I think that if that loses out to conversations on the street about Teslas versus the new hybrid Porsche, the city's in trouble. I think the city really is in trouble. And that's not to say that I'm, against this incredible engine of wealth that is the city, but I think that this is a tension, and it's a tension that San Francisco is going through right now as well. How will the city maintain this character of, being part of this vibrant intellectual hub that is not just Palo Alto, not just San Francisco, but the whole Bay Area? How will you keep that with this incredible influx of people? You've all heard stories. People are moving from their apartments in Wall Street to Palo Alto to be part of this, or to San Francisco to be part of this, right? That's a change, not just in demographics, but also a change in culture and values that at the Institute for the Future we really think about a lot. And we're often asked at the Institute when we're revealing elements of the secret sauce for innovation, what about culture? What about the culture here is important? And I'm sure you've all heard the fail early, fail often. You're all very familiar with the element of entrepreneurship that is not just a fierce desire to make as much money as you can, but also a fierce desire to create something new for the world that doesn't exist, and to push the limits of not just technology, but of physics, of human behavior, of deep understanding. And when you have the engines that are just engines of business and growth steering the ship and deciding the direction, that's where the innovation, I think, I would argue, maybe starts to get diluted a little bit. And I think that's maybe why Silicon Alley in Manhattan still hasn't beaten out Silicon Valley. I think there's something here that's more than just technological prowess and engineering skills. And I think it's a deep intellectual curiosity that I think this city needs to actively work to preserve.
Sure. This is the beginning for most of us of the comp plan discussion. It's your comp plan. I get to participate because I'm a resident. And those decisions are our decisions. That's why it's called our Palo Alto. But Palo Alto will deal with some very powerful regional forces. That doesn't tell us what to do, but it tells us a piece of the future. That's kind of what I do for a living. So the 1 million jobs and the 2 million people and the roughly 700,000 households that would go with that are one vision of the future that is now being dramatically outrun by the forces that David said. the job growth and population growth projections that I did have been just surged by in the past 2 or 3 years by what's happened on the ground. In the first quarter of this year, our 3 counties, Santa Clara, San Mateo, and San Francisco, got 1 out of every $2 of venture capital in the whole United States. And that level was higher than anything except for the dot-com boom. So Palo Alto and we will make these decisions in the context of enormous growth, and to remember what Elliot said, enormous growth in people who didn't come from Europe and haven't been here for a long time and may not look like all of us in the audience. That's part of who we're going to be. That's part of who's in the companies. David would have told you if I had asked him how many of those companies are run by people who came here from abroad or are staffed by people who came here from abroad. So these hard and gutty decisions, and I know how gutty they are made in the context of a region where all of our neighboring cities are dealing with those same pressures.
Excellent. Well, I think on any one of these, we could spend an evening talking about it. I want to make sure that we get to all the different sort of outlier points. And one of the ones that you mentioned, Stephen, when you were speaking last, was the senior population in town, and that's where we sort of stand out from other communities. It's an area where we will continue to grow. I just know anecdotally, when we were on council, talking to so many members of the community, I was hearing more and more, and the data was showing that boomers were not looking to leave town as they once were, thinking of moving to retire in Arizona or Florida or someplace else. They were planning to stay, which leads one to think about what sort of services this community needs to provide with the growing senior population. So can you talk a little bit more about what you think that data shows us and what implications you think that might have for this community?
Okay. It's reasonably complicated and somewhat contentious. So I think the first big point is that the caricature of a senior when I was growing up, okay, their health, their longevity, the amount of time they worked, what their preferences were, is different than my generation. I'm 72, and I'm still working full-time, and most of the people I know who are the parents of the kids our son and daughter went to school with are active seniors. So the fact that we have a large 65-plus population at the moment doesn't imply anything but a lot of very active people that love being in Palo Alto. As we move towards 2030, part of them, as Ann said, will stay in their homes and be completely happy. Ann's statement contradicts my experience, where most of the families of the children our children went to school with did not either die or retire, but sold their house to a then younger family who brought kids in. So I certainly agree with the cycle. So I think there are two challenges. One is that as those numbers grow, some will want to stay in their home, maybe many. Some will be looking for places like Channing House or similar places, so the demand for various levels of assistance, not nursing homes, but various levels of active assistance will grow. And some will do what we did, which was sell the big house when the kids moved out and we moved downtown. I think there are a certain number of those families, and I was at a big conference where 2 or 3 people got up and said, I would love to sell my house and live in downtown. This was Berkeley. And so I think that's another challenge, the challenge facing how do we allow people who want to remain here, a variety of housing choices, and how do we begin to prepare slowly for active seniors and then less active seniors, because the numbers are going to grow.
Well, from seniors to kids, Anne, let's talk about another point that was mentioned previously, and that is the increasing diversity within the community. Could you talk a little bit about how that impacts schools? Languages spoken, when we have an increased foreign-born population, how does that impact what happens during the school day and sort of the culture within classrooms and schools?
Yeah, that's a great question, because Palo Alto schools become more diverse every year. And there's got you a little chart in there if you want to look at it. But there's, starting with the 2010-11 school year, Palo Alto became majority minority. So there were more minority students in Palo Alto Unified than white students. But that really doesn't do justice to that big picture, because it's not just about racial diversity, right? And I want to say that, this is an amazing opportunity for our kids. There's so much diversity in our community. It gives them an opportunity to learn about other cultures and really grow into sensitive, caring adults. And they live in a much more diverse world than I think any of us grew up in, and that's a great opportunity for them. But we also it means our teachers have to learn how to be prepared to meet the needs of English language learners, because that's a huge proportion of the students that we have coming to our community. And so as a district, we spend a lot of time working to ensure that our teachers are trained to appropriately address those needs. And we also need to provide services to families in their preferred languages. So even as the students learn English, the parents don't always come along as quickly. So we need to be able to support them. And we also support them through the adult school through English language classes there. So some data on the diversity. The district has 4,215 students. That's more than a third, for whom English is a second language. Right? So think about that. It matches your data perfectly. More than a third of our kids did not grow up in a household where they learned English first. Officially, that's 46 languages spoken at home. One of those 46 is other non-English. Our internal count is over 60 languages. So these students come from many countries, and they represent not only lots of geographies, but a lot of socioeconomic diversity. Because this encompasses everyone from the students whose parents are Stanford students or professors, to students whose parents who are not literate in any language, right? So this is the entire socioeconomic and education scale. We see some of these kids from a few months to their entire educational career. So they have varying levels of support as English language learners. Some of them come to us completely fluent in English, even though they are English as a second language students. Others literally walk into the classroom and they don't speak a single word of English, and we start from there with them. Right now, of those 4,200 kids, 2,700 are reclassified as fluent English speakers. So, even though a third of our kids do not speak English as their first language, only about 10% of our students actually are actively learning English. The rest are fluent speakers. Many of them, like I said, arrived that way, but many of them learned in our district. So we support every one of those kids every day, whether that's with English language instruction or through integrating cultural differences into the classroom. But it makes for a much, much more interesting place than I think any of us grew up in. Even those of you who grew up in Palo Alto, I think it's a very interesting and different place.
Well, some of these shifts reflect what's happening in California as a whole, and I know at the Institute for the Future there's a lot of discussion about California, not just Palo Alto, and what those trends are. I was hoping you could speak a little bit about what you're seeing California-wide and how you think that speaks to what's happening here in the city.
Well, a couple years ago, California seemed like it was at the brink. Some of you probably realize this, the brink of financial collapse. At the Institute, we wanted to do something about it, so we actually made a map about the future of California. There are some copies of that on one of the tables as you're leaving if you want to grab that. And you can also see the map on our website. You can download a free copy. And we actually did a whole competition to gather ideas. It was a massively multiplayer online game to get ideas about what could help fix or save or improve the future of California. So this is something that we've worked on quite a bit. I think one of the big things that California and Palo Alto share is that the whole country and the whole world is looking at us, and that's actually a really important thing. And in many ways, we face similar problems. Anne just described the education problems that we have, questions related to policies around language, policies around inequality of access to education and to social services. I mean, those are important questions. The inequality of Palo Alto, or the resources and the services available, puts Palo Alto in a much better position than much of the state of California. But even so, those inequalities, that majority-minority situation that Palo Alto is now experiencing, California was experiencing before that. And so the ways that Palo Alto and that the state of California figure out to deal with those questions and those problems are not just important in and of themselves, in the sense that we're solving those problems, but we become models for the rest of the world. And it seems a bit arrogant in a way to think that way and to say that, but I say it not out of an arrogance, I hope, but much more out of a sense of imperative that we have to really think hard about what are the problems that we're facing, how are we going to solve them here in our city and in our state in innovative ways, because we are almost guaranteed that the rest of the world is going to look at and think about how we have dealt with and solved these problems. And again, it's not just an abstract thing. When laws are being made at the state level, the state needs to think about what laws already exist in the different cities. When laws are being made in other cities, they look to Palo Alto as an example. And when national policy is being made, California is often a state that is ahead of the game in terms of automobile standards, in terms of environmental regulations, climate change. So and also education. California is dealing with a lot of these big questions around education before the rest of the country is going to be facing them. But it's not just in those situations where we're dealing with something before the rest of the country. It's some of the problems we're experiencing at the same time. And so in any case, what I would say is that think about as Palo Alto, and hopefully not in an arrogant way, but in a sense of duty, as you're having these debates, think about the ways that they're not just local questions. And if you do take advantage of the fact that Palo Alto is a place that doesn't have the severe poverty that much of California is facing, or the severe levels of inequality that the state overall faces, and if we solve the problems of this city in ways that simply ignore the problems that we don't have in such a huge way here because we can afford to ignore them, we may be doing a disservice to the communities around us, and also not thinking as deeply as we could be about how those decisions that we make here may affect other places.
I'd love to hear, and we're getting into, it sounds like opinion, but I know you'll approach it based on data. I'm curious to hear what, from your vantage point, as you've looked at data that indicates sort of who we are and who we might become, what excites you about the future for this city and what causes you concern?
We're a happening place. We and the university and the companies have created a place that people want to be. Now it's made it really, really expensive for people who want to buy or rent, or for companies that want to rent space. But we are a success, okay? And we in the comp plan are trying to blend that success with a variety of views about what our city should be. When I talk to people about what the region or what communities in general, not just Palo Alto, need to do, I talk about two things. One, we are really, really good at, and again it goes back to what Elliot talked about. We're a welcoming community in a region. We have welcomed people with 62 or 47 languages. We have welcomed people from all around the world to come here and live and go to school and start companies. We are a leader back in the 1970s of welcoming people who slept overnight in their tennies in the Apple, workrooms development. We welcome a diversity of styles, a diversity of sexual preferences, a diversity of religions. We are a welcoming community, and that is so important. And the second thing, and here's where I worry, a little, because the Palo Alto that I read about or listen to in council is grumpy, just like the U.S. Congress is grumpy, and the state of California legislature is grumpy. And somehow out of that grumpiness, we have to continue to make this a welcoming place, and a place that's a good place to live and work. Because that's what we are. We are a place that people want to live and raise their kids, and we are a place where people work. And there's one last thing that we haven't said a word about. We are the town accompanying one of the major universities in the world. We are a university town, and we haven't talked about the students, we haven't talked about the faculty. That's an important part of who we are.
Well, let's definitely come back to that. And could you talk a little bit about looking ahead, what excites you, what concerns you about the data?
I hate to be the only one asking the question.
That's okay, we're actually gonna open it up for questions in just a little bit. We're gonna do another round and then we'll be ready for you.
Okay.
Please do.
Yes.
So, our students are terrific and amazing in this community. And one of the huge things that excites me is just the potential we see in this huge diversity of students we have, with all these kids from different socioeconomic backgrounds from all over the world, the Stanford families, the local families, the high-tech families, all these folks coming together and creating this really rich environment. And the fact of the matter is, we all know that California is 49th in school funding in the country, right? Palo Alto does a lot better than most of California. And the fact of the matter is also that with the flattening enrollment growth in the district and the incredible increases in property values, the district has a lot of potential to have more funding to do more great things for kids. And so that's my excitement and my fear, right? Is that my excitement is that there's going to be money to do great things for kids if enrollment stays flat and we see what we think we're going to see. But we can also squander that money. We can also simply have lots more kids and have less money per kid. So there are challenges. Whenever you have opportunities like that, there are also challenges that you may not use the money right, or that you may not have the money you think you're going to have. We could fall into another economic crisis and be back where we were. There are also tensions that we have around school growth and around school property use, right? We debate with the city. What are we going to do with Cubberley, right? The biggest piece of undeveloped land or underutilized land that's publicly owned in the city. We have tensions with Stanford. They're bringing in more faculty, more students, more housing, and more kids. And we look at them and say, so, can we have some money? And they say, no. Maybe, can we have some land? No, that's okay. So, we continue to debate with them how we can serve our kids and serve the kids that come in from Stanford. And there's actually, again, some data in your packet on the number of kids we're seeing coming in from Stanford. And then our last challenge for the district is we can pretty much project city growth. I mean, maybe not how large it is, but we can project that it's going to go this way. School districts are a lot harder. We know their cycles, and trying to get it right and have the right facilities is exciting because there's opportunities, but it's also a challenge.
David, same question for you. What excites you, what concerns you about the future of Palo Alto?
I'm excited that we thought maybe we'd have 10 people tonight, and right? And this is amazing. As Sid mentioned in the beginning, one of the groups that I'm part of at the Institute for the Future is called the Governance Futures Lab. And we prototype and explore new technologies and practices of governance. And it's an enormous privilege to be located in a city where so many people are interested in being part of civic discourse in this way and are turning out for a conversation like this. And between that and the new Institute for the Future Space that I mentioned at Emerson and Hamilton, where we're planning, one of you mentioned, just from walking by, the Institute is in the process of, as people thinking about the future, we're always experimenting on ourselves and reinventing ourselves. But right now, we are in the process of becoming a much more, the term we use is massively public organization. And I think that this opportunity of having the storefront space, having the opportunity to work much more with the city of Palo Alto at events like this is really exciting. And it's exciting to know that there is already a community of people like you that are going to be interested in being part of that process. What scares me? How many of you work at Palantir here?
There's the stump.
We did. Is there one? Okay, we have one. They're mostly younger. Yeah, I noticed them because everyone sitting next to me on Caltrain works at Palantir. Palantir gets a really good deal because they don't have to have the shuttle buses because of Caltrain. But yeah, I mean. Palantir is really interesting because they've taken pretty much every, as far as I know, pretty much every piece of real estate that Facebook was in previously in the downtown, and then some. So pretty much all of our neighbors are Palantir at Institute for the Future, and that's it doesn't scare me for any particularly great reason, except that all I see around me is people who work at Palantir, and I'm not quite sure what Palantir's role, and maybe you can answer this later, but what the role is for that company in engaging with the community, how it's going to be part of the community, and I think that's just a more general fear that I have is that these kinds of conversations like what we're having tonight could eventually lose out to just simply the tech industry taking over all of the space for all of the conversations about what the future of Palo Alto is.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I think incredible. Can we get a round of applause before we open up the question? Great insights. Just again, the beginning of a conversation. Now we want to really engage the audience and hear from you. And we have a mic, so we want to make sure that you speak into the mic whenever you have a question, and so that we can catch it on
So
the video.
my question is specific to who we are. In Palo Alto, we welcome educated foreigners. We don't throw our doors wide open, I believe. We don't throw our doors open to different socioeconomic groups, unless you're including East Palo Alto. And I'm just talking about Palo Alto specifically. My children went to school here in Palo Alto, 3 of them. And they attended schools in Palo Alto, but they can't afford to buy a home in Palo Alto or in the Bay Area. It's hard. It would be hard for them to do that. So where do the children in the Palo Alto schools come from? Their young families. Well, they are from young, wealthy parents who were either are startup CEOs or employees with stock options. They're wealthy.
So let me talk a little bit to that. So in Palo Alto, we have 7.5% of our kids on free and reduced lunch in the district, which is the only real proxy I have to tell you how many kids are poor, right?
But I saw that,
Right.
7.5, and other communities are larger.
Right. So what's interesting about that, a couple things. One is most of those kids live in Palo Alto. Most of the kids, a good percentage of the kids who come from East Palo Alto in the Tinsley program are middle-class kids. They're not all poor kids. They're all minority kids, but they are not all poor kids. The poorest kids in the district actually live in Palo Alto. And there, you can talk more about what there is in terms of housing in Palo Alto for folks with lower incomes. I won't argue that it's hard to afford to live in Palo Alto. Most of our teachers, most of the people who work in the city, for the city, can't afford to live in Palo Alto. I live in Menlo Park, in the cheap part of Menlo Park, which is where I can barely afford to live. So maybe you want to talk a little about the demographic piece of that. I don't know.
Well, I mean, you're certainly correct that Palo Alto has very high home prices and very high rents, and they've been rising. So part of the challenge of diversity is going to be very difficult. At the one end, you have this huge contention that goes on in all of the cities about subsidized housing, because that's, if you want to have reasonably poor families live in your city, that's the only way. And beside the contention, it's really difficult in terms of funding. I think you overstate that they're all CEOs. For what it's worth, no, I mean, I think, yeah, what?
The young ones, he said.
In my building of 17 units, there are 5 families with children. They are reasonably affluent. There's not a CEO or an IPO or a stock executive above them. There are lots of people with 200 families that can make $100,000, $150,000 a year. They're not CEOs. There's a group in the middle. That's more who we are. I mean, there simply aren't that many CEOs to own the stuff in Palo Alto, so. But yeah, the problem you raised is a serious problem for all the communities in the region. How do we house people that can't afford these prices? And one answer, which again is not completely effective and is very unpopular, is to build more stuff. Because housing is a market. And at some level, the more you build, it takes the pressure off of gentrification because you have more homes for people at the upper end to go after, less pressure in the middle. But it's a partial step if you're really talking about housing poor families. It's tough.
And the question, I know, is part of that scale. How much would you have to build to really affect those overall prices and have them come down of multifamily, smaller units throughout the city to really see an impact in a community where there's such high demand? I know, David, you wanted to.
Well, but there's one, I mean, you touched on the second piece. People throughout the region are experimenting with smaller units. You know, if instead of a 1,500 square foot unit, you have a 500 square foot unit, and you have people that want to do that, that's going to cost less. I don't know the demand characteristics, but I think some of that's being successful.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier I was evicted 6 months ago from my apartment in the Mission in San Francisco, and you know, my wife and I would love to be able to afford to buy a house in either San Francisco or Palo Alto, and it's not in the cards, and it's not in the cards for a lot of our friends. And what someone told me yesterday is that you don't buy a house in San Francisco with a good salary, you buy with shares, and right, and that's just, you know, even if you have two people earning a good salary, it's not doable. And you know, when you talk to people though who live in New York about this problem, they have an interesting response, which is, yeah, I can't afford to buy a house in Manhattan either, right? So what do you expect? Why do you think you should be able to, right? And I think these are regional problems. These are not city problems. And I don't think, I mean, unless Palo Alto wants to build a whole lot more housing, the city of Palo Alto is not going to
It's a
solve.
regional problem, yeah.
Right, is not going to solve the problem on this scale, and probably San Francisco isn't even going to be able to solve it. The projections of how, you know, there's something like, I don't know, 10,000 new units under construction in San Francisco right now, and that is not even close to the projections of how many new units you'd have to build in that city to make a dent in the housing prices. One thing that might change it is if we go back to the crisis of 2008 or 2009. I don't think we want that solution to our housing problem, though.
But David brings up a 30-second quick point. If you want less traffic and lower prices, you run a really good recession. No, but it's true. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, some comments first. Responding to the complaint that Palo Alto doesn't welcome lower-income people and minorities is false. For 40 years, Palo Alto has required BMR developments, BMR housing in new developments. One of the first cities in the country, if not in the world, to do that. We have over 1,100 BMR units, and at least 400 of those are for very low-income people. So we do that, and we have been doing it, as I say, for 40 years. Second, on the schools, some of those people who are over 65 today, in the next 10 or 15 years, are going to die. And those single-family homes are going to be sold to families with kids. So even though the total number of seniors is going to increase because the number of people who are in their 50s now who don't have kids at home are going to be in their 60s, it's not going to change the lack of kids at home, but you're going to see a turnover as the older people start moving out. So I see the school population actually rising in 5 or 10 years. And one of the questions I've got from all this is, if you build more housing, will the housing be more affordable? And from what I've seen, the answer is no. Because what drives the rate, the market, is the market. And since the housing market in Palo Alto for the last 10 years has been no longer than the 4th most expensive in the entire country, usually it's the 1st or 2nd, and that's for cities that have both housing and commercial, you're not going to see the prices go down. The other comment you had was about building small units. I can't say what people want today, but I can tell you a few years ago, there were 2 developments in Palo Alto which were built. There's one on El Camino near Charleston. There's one on San Antonio near the Mayfield Mall at about 50 to 60% of the density allowed. Developers were asked why, and the answer was, in order to fit the FAR, we needed larger units and fewer of them because that's what the people wanted. We couldn't sell small units. I don't think you're going to sell very many 500 square foot units in Palo Alto today. So, because if people are going to want to move in with kids, and they can't have too many kids in a 500 square foot unit. So you're going to have more larger units. The other thing that you have to keep in mind is every housing unit in Palo Alto, and especially multifamily, costs the city between $2,400 and $2,600 a year more in services than it pays in taxes. You build a lot more housing units, the city goes broke.
Anybody want to respond to those comments? I do want to say quickly for those watching at home or folks in the room that BMR stands for below market rate, and that's a program that we've had in Palo Alto, as Bob mentioned, for quite some time. A lot of information on the website to learn more about that, but it's how we integrate affordable housing throughout the community, both in individual projects and in standalone projects. And FAR, floor area ratio, is a way that growth is decided and within certain projects. What's appropriate, and you can find more information about that on the web, just so people understand the acronyms. Feedback, comments?
Well, I promised everybody that I was here to talk about the facts of who we are and where we're going, and that I would not, in this forum, get in a policy debate. There was no question there, and so I'm going to honor my promise.
I know we have a question in the back.
Yeah, I guess this question is mostly for David. Are there problems and issues that you think that Palo Alto is sort of stressing about right now, whether it's downtown congestion and parking, things like that, that we're maybe focusing our lenses in the wrong place? One of your colleagues, I'm not going to put you on the hot seat, but one of your colleagues said, you know, downtown traffic may not be an issue in 10 or 15 years because the whole car structure will be different. The people won't own cars. Driverless cars will be delivered to your home for whatever you need at that moment. And so that we're sort of we spend a lot of time focusing on problems that may not be problems. Can you comment on that, or let us know where you think we may be not focusing on the right issues?
Yeah, well, I had a funny experience the other day. I was on Caltrain and really deep in an email response to someone, and I forgot to get off at university, and I got off at California instead. But I have this great, it's not in it's in my bag. I have this little blue key that lets me use the Bay Area bike share bikes, and
Right.
it was so fortuitous that I was able to get off at California and pop my key in the thing and take a bike and ride my bike, my temporary bike, back to university. And it was a beautiful ride. It was a great, beautiful day too. The weather's always better here than San Francisco, actually. But yeah, I mean, I do think, thinking about cars and parking garages and more parking garages and more cars and bigger roads may not serve you as well as, thinking more about, does Palo Alto want more than, is it just 2 of the bike share stations that are here right now? Or are there 3? Okay. Could there be more than 3, right? I mean, is that more than any other city outside of San Francisco? Probably. So, I mean, yeah, maybe that sounds like you've one example of where that's going. But I think, in terms of other questions that the city could be, or that Palo Alto is worried about, that you shouldn't be worried about, or that we shouldn't be worried about. It's hard for me to say because what are the things that you're most worried about right now? I mean, I can't read your mind, or I'm not sure what Palo Alto is most worried about.
I'm just thinking, are there lenses that we should be looking through that we're missing?
Yeah, well, one lens is actually, we're probably in a tech bubble again right now. So how do we make decisions that will get us through the next trough, right? I mean, that's one. At the Institute, we have this great mandate that really forces us to think not about the next quarter or the next mayoral term or city council term, but I'm part of the 10-year forecast program, and we have to think about the next 10 years. And if we're just thinking about the next 5 years, we're not doing our job right. So I think I would just encourage all of you to think about that. Think about the fact that this situation now of so many jobs and so much venture capital pouring in, that wasn't happening just 5 years ago, right? And 5 years from now, it might not be happening too. So how do you think about making decisions for a city that has 50% less investment coming in?
Let me put a quick number on David's point. Last month, our county was the fastest growing county in terms of job growth in the United States for a large metropolitan area, 4.5%, 4.4%. Okay. The growth numbers that Palo Alto is looking at in a regional context, the 1 million jobs and 2 million people and 700,000 households, is 1% growth a year to 2040. Those numbers don't assume the bubble is going to continue. They can include a lot of people retiring, but that 1% a year over 30 years is for the average community in the region a 30% increase in people and jobs and households. So while David's right that we shouldn't plan for the bubble, and Ann is right that there will be ups and downs, that long-term growth rate of about 1% a year over the comp plan period, I would be willing to take wagers that if anything, it's a little bit high.
I just want to add one other thing. So one of my formative experiences growing up in this area was being part of a group called Bay Area Action, which became Actera. So is Peter Dreckmeyer in the room? Okay. So Peter Dreckmeyer was an amazing mentor to me, him and David Smirnoff when I was in high school. And being part of Actera, then the Bay Area Action Schools Group, was just such a formative experience for me. Being taught at a young age that it was my privilege and my responsibility to be part of a civic discourse and to be part of a conversation about the future of the world, and that I had a responsibility to do something about it if I saw something I didn't like. I remember standing on one of the overpasses over 101 with with the Actera group holding up giant letters saying, "Why not carpool?" And it was really awesome. And I think that I think that's probably still a big focus of a lot of you, is thinking about how to educate your children in Palo Alto. And I would say that's definitely a good thing, and keep that in the same place. And having organizations like Actera here and teaching your kids those kinds of things is a good direction to keep going in.
Okay. First, let me just say thank you. This is a great panel. I'm so thankful the city put this together, and also to our moderator. Your involvement in the city inspired you get more involved in this process. And one of the things I've encountered as I became more involved is this general sense of fear among residents. And Mr. Levy's comment about grumpiness really resonated with my experience, actually. It always strikes me that no one could have predicted what came in the 70s. You couldn't have, in your wildest dreams, you could not have predicted what was going to happen from 1970 on if you were a resident of this community. And I wonder if that's the reason why we were so successful. We didn't know that there was something that was going to happen so dramatically, that the dramatic evolution that occurred. And maybe now, because of that, people's experiences have been shaped, so they fear, they understand how dramatic a change can be, and so they fear these visions they have of what could happen next. I guess as a member of this endangered species, the very early 30-something homeowner in Palo Alto, I wonder if you guys could comment on what we can do to encourage people to fear the unknown and I guess the known less than they do, particularly in the wake of one of your comments tonight was that we're not going to be able to build enough housing supply to meet the demand. But even our remarkably feeble attempts, like particularly Maybell, which was just a disappointing result, right? Even our remarkably feeble attempts to create a welcoming housing opportunity failed. And I wonder, from your perspectives, what we can do to instill a little fear of the known and unknown in this process.
I don't know if anybody wants to take that. I'll say that I think from my vantage point, a big part of that is education, right? You want to start with education of the entire community. And so I applaud the mayor and the city staff for creating this series of conversations that will take place. My hope is that everybody here will, as we move to other ones, to dive deep into housing and some of the particular issues that the community is concerned about, we'll all bring a person or two with them and bring your neighbors, and we expand this to a greater conversation, because I think that education then leads to participation, leads to active involvement, leads to advocacy, and that's what is really the strength of the community, whatever your position and how you feel certain things fell on particular issues. That education, that educated involvement, I think is what helps lessen fear, because people at least understand how their community works and how they can get involved and how they can shift it. But as we think about the future and we think about the conversation that we've had tonight, we'd love to hear from the panelists.
Well, it's a nuanced issue. I've lived here for 50 years, and I don't think my neighbors fear the ethnic change and the coming of immigrants. I think we've maintained ourselves as a pretty welcoming community. So that's one piece. I think certainly the residents who are vocal, and a lot of them, fear the implications of the growth that this region's going to have 2 million more people and 1 million more jobs and 700,000 more households, and how many of them will be here and what will they be like. And I don't have any great answer. I would urge the staff and the council in the comp plan to make pictures, to use graphics, to use scenarios, to play around with different ways that this growth might be accommodated so that citizens can see some options on that. And the third point is, I think what both you and Sid said, is that this is an effort to reach out to those people who are large in our population who don't come to meetings. The 55% of, 45% of the people that live in multifamily units, the 7 in 10 households that don't have kids, the seniors who are deciding maybe they don't want to live in the old house. Just get all the voices in the room to hash it out. Because there is an age, there's probably, I think around fear, there's probably an age differential. I don't know that for sure, and so you do what everybody else does to reduce fear. You get people in a room and talk to each other.
You know, a lot of what I see in the community, I'm not even sure is, I describe as fear. Maybe it's fear, maybe it's, I almost sometimes think it's anger. And my advice would be, as I watch the discourse in this community, and it's not unique to Palo Alto, is assume good intent, right? I see so much discourse in this community that assumes that the mayor or the city council or the planning commission or the school district or the school board or the teacher or whatever public servant you want to pick or whatever politician you want to pick is doing what they're doing for some bad reason, right? People get involved in the community. People take jobs working for the government because they want to make a difference, right? Not every single person, but most of them. And so we need to assume good intent of the people working for us as citizens. We need to assume good intent of our neighbors in this conversation. And I think we could change the conversation that we have together if we can look at other people and try and understand where they're coming from with the assumption that they mean well, not that they're up to something. So that would be my guidance as I walk out the door.
One other thing, so I've done a fair bit of campaign organizing and specifically around electoral campaigns. And one of the big lessons is that if you really care about the outcome, don't spend too much of your time trying to actually change anyone's mind, just focus on turnout. And if you look around the room tonight, if you think of this conversation and the people in this room as a proxy for who's going to turn out and actually vote in Palo Alto, maybe you could do some work in your demographic on turnout, and that could change the conversation.
I will point out as well that we have members of the media and others here who will amplify the message throughout the community. There are other ways that people engage besides showing up at meetings, but that in-person interaction is so important, and the dialogue is so important. And I thank you all for being here this evening. We have a question here.
Yeah. So just, I have a comment about housing. When I moved here in 1976 from Amherst, Massachusetts, already there was a problem with housing prices. The first thing I learned was that people were buying second houses so they could rent them and then sell them, and the house would increase in price. And I haven't seen that slow down. It's exponentially now out of sight. So I've mostly rented. So that's just the comment on the housing prices. As far as the jobs, you're mentioning all these jobs. What kind of jobs are you talking about? Are these all tech jobs? What if you're in a position like mine where you're unemployed and you don't have that background, and you're hearing these wonderful statistics of the jobs increasing and you can't get one? And then the unemployment. I'm not sure people think about it, but I'm one of those people whose unemployment was cut off. And when that happens in a place like Palo Alto, you look around and there is a bit of fear. Who's going to think I'm that person? Or where am I going to get help if I'm suddenly lost my apartment, which has almost happened. So I think there are a lot of things that many people, and I think I understand what you were saying. It's not CEOs, he's saying. There's so many people with so much wealth that those who might be on the edge, and it doesn't take much but an illness or a divorce to be forced to the edge, where is the help and where are you going to fit here? You get pushed and you become afraid. There's only one bookstore left in Palo Alto, Bell's. So that says something too.
wonder if there's any commentary on sort of the job sectors, or I don't know if you've studied that, Stephen, in looking at what sectors are growing or trends in Palo Alto over time in those areas.
Oh golly, you have like a half an hour? You know, I've spent 1.5 years on a HUD project looking at how to help people who work in low and moderate wage jobs move up. It's a huge piece of my life. I'm not quite sure a city can do anything about that. We in Palo Alto live and work everywhere, so the jobs in Palo Alto are mostly not held by the residents. But at the regional level, you're talking about something that's all over the nation. We've become an hourglass economy in a sense, that there are job growth and particularly wage growth at the top. It's primarily here tech, but it could be fracking in North Dakota or chemicals in Texas, jobs at the top. And there are a huge and growing number of people working in restaurants or in retail stores or cleaning buildings. And for at least a long while, the jobs in the middle and the wage growth in the middle has disappeared. It's a huge national challenge, and I can't give you an easy answer, and I'm not quite sure that a city has an answer. Pretty much this is federal stuff, certainly the unemployment.
I think it's a self-satisfied city.
What?
I think that people feel, I'm in Palo Alto and I'm lucky and I'm satisfied and I don't have to look further, because actually this bubble could burst. And if you all look at the New York Times on Sunday, the big magazine section is, what is the bubble? What happens if the bubble bursts in Palo Alto? Which is what's going to be.
Well, I was just going to say, firstly, I'm very sorry to hear about your situation, and I think this is a really good reminder for this group that Palo Alto does have problems like unemployment, and Palo Alto does have homelessness, and Cubberley, I took community college classes at Cubberley when I was in high school, actually, and I think there are things that the city does and can do, or parts of the city that affect the community college district and job training. But I think that also this points to that a lot, not only are a lot of the jobs here for people from other cities or for people who are highly trained in technology or business, but also a lot of companies move through Palo Alto really quick and quickly and end up campusing, which I heard is a verb recently. So eventually Palantir will likely campus, as Facebook did as well. And so that situation of these companies not necessarily thinking of Palo Alto as their long-term home, I think does have an impact in terms of they're not going to be as engaged as companies that have been and will stay in the city for 20 or 30 years in terms of thinking about questions like the important ones that you raised.
I think the one response we have here, which is not a city response, it's a state response, is the community college and the adult school programs, which are very much focused on finding ways to train people for good middle-class jobs. And now the challenge is, where are they? But they try and identify what those jobs are and provide training programs. For example, the adult school now has network administrator training because that's identified as a good middle-class job that you can be educated for without going to college. So it's one effort to make, but it's really state-driven.
I'm thinking that, there are some questions, why didn't the dog bark at night? And I think there are questions that we are not asking here. And one of them is, I'll say the obvious, that Palo Alto is obviously part of California, the United States, and the world. And when we have, say, wonderful jobs, my question is, what percentage of those jobs are dedicated to peace and the environment, and what are predicated on a war economy? 60% of the United States GDP is based on the war economy, which is not productive for us, our children, grandchildren. I would like to see us encourage industry that is peaceful and discourage the part that is based on the military here. I also feel that we should be asking Washington for more money for low-income housing and more money for all the services that we need. It's the lowest that it has ever been. We are part of the world community. We don't want fracking. It's coming up in California. We want to see more solar in Palo Alto. It's an affluent community. Why are there not many more solar equipped homes and pushing solar and wind and energy? I feel that at one point the population was very concerned with these the questions of justice and peace, and I don't see that equation being here at this meeting or being brought to the forefront. And the dangers of climate change, of world war, a constant war, are issues that affect all of us, and we cannot be contained in Palo Alto in a little cocoon that is oblivious to them. Thank you.
Anyone want to provide feedback on that?
Yeah. I'll join the applause for you. Thank you. I didn't want to mention my Berkeley diploma in this room, but me too. Okay, there are two of us. Oh wow. Okay, very strange. So yeah, I mean, I mentioned earlier that being part of Actera. I also protested the Gap at Stanford Shopping Center for their sweatshop policies. I noticed that there was a loyal Occupy Palo Alto showing on University Avenue for many months, and I think that is a great part of this city, and that combination of a deep concern with justice and peace and the environment, combined with massive amounts of resources that occasionally get thrown behind that, I think is really a great thing about Palo Alto that you should cherish and make sure that the next generation of Palo Altans cherish as well. Like I said, I'll probably never be able to buy a house here, and so I will continue to be someone for probably quite some time that works in Palo Alto and can't afford to live here. So that's that values transmission of what you're discussing, maybe to this gentleman over here, I think is a really important thing, and I think that concern with the world and with these questions that you're raising is a core part of the DNA of innovation as well. And I think that makes me kind of a weird outlier in the what is Silicon Valley, why is Silicon Valley special, but and how did Silicon Valley become this way? But there are a number of people who've made this argument, and I think it's a really important one to make, that innovation is something that comes out of not just this, again, technical prowess, but a deep concern and curiosity with the world, how the world works, and what our responsibility is to change it, and how we actually shape the world that we live in. And I just love your comment and your feedback, and I hope that you'll keep asking those questions at all of the meetings in this series.
And if you haven't spent time on our high school campuses lately, I would encourage you to go meet some kids. There's a lot of social consciousness on our campuses, and our students are thinking about those things. They're not just thinking about grades.
Thanks. Tim McCormick, I'm a Palo Alto resident. I just wanted to say about housing, which I think is really a core leading issue for many of us. The way I look at it, I think that the crisis of housing in the Bay Area is really also a great opportunity, because It's something that is a problem globally. Cities all over the world have a similar problem with fast rising unaffordability and an increasing need for different ways of living and adapting. And, and the way I look at it is Palo Alto has the potential to actually be a fantastic laboratory and leader in that for a number of reasons. First of all, a leader in coming up with new innovative ways of building and living that are adapting to these needs. And the reason I think that is, first of all, tremendous wealth of money, of education, of knowledge, of innovation culture, and then institutions like Stanford, Stanford D School, Institute for the Future, and then particular things like an elderly population and a housing stock that needs adaptation. So I'd just like to say, for me, a fear for me is I don't know how long I can live here because of housing. A excitement for me is what a great laboratory it could be as a place to solve that, and not only solve it as a local issue, but as a model for anywhere in the world. So.
Come on up.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for a very stimulating evening, and you raised a number of points. Let me just make 3 points, and maybe you can respond. David, you made the point that cities are a place where people can interact. There's creative places for them to meet and interact. Cities are places where you interact. And Silicon Valley was built on a unique set of interactions, informal, in places around town, and especially job mobility. There's indications now that with the increase in values of properties, those informal meeting places are disappearing and job mobility is declining. Another consequence, Steve, that goes to one of your references, that we've gone through a period of time with tremendous job growth over the last 4 or 5 years, been fantastic. But one of the things that shows up on the city finances is residences are now paying 74% of property taxes, and that is going up 1% per year. Essentially, residences are subsidizing these high-valued properties. Of course, it affects the schools. So what are we doing with our high-value properties? And to go to the PAUSD, maybe we are leveling off in enrollments because the dynamics of residential growth is changing. And the scariest number I have come across over the last 10 years is that San Francisco is the only county west of the Mississippi that has a declining population of 5 to 17-year-olds. That is scary. And the question is, when we talk about our future, we want to talk about a mixed, balanced community and don't want to find ourselves getting into a situation where we would run into a situation like that. So just a few responses to the ideas that have come up.
Hi, Greg's point with the previous speaker. I think the most educational and forthcoming thing that the council can do as it looks at this is use this incredible innovation that we have in the city and that you can draw on to lay out some real alternatives. That's what a comp plan is supposed to be. We can have a debate later, but let's get enough variety out there. And that includes housing, but it also includes jobs and how they connect and transportation. In regard to both the city, well, primarily the city's fiscal issue. All of the cities here are captive to a tax system that doesn't honor local rule and local control. And to be specific, the fastest growing revenue source in the state is income taxes, and cities don't get that. cities have a property tax structure that is still heavily oriented to goods, which are growing somewhat slowly, and not to services, except maybe for the hotel tax. And finally, you pointed out to, and I think that it's, what Greg said is correct. Because of some of the vagaries of Prop 13 and the fact that homeowners hold on to their property somewhat longer than commercial, the proportion of property taxes paid by residents, either directly or through rent, is increasing. That's true for all of the cities. That, to me, suggests some rethinking of Prop 13 again for local control. So I would have Palo Alto be a leader in the region and the state and banding with other cities to get a local government tax system, including transportation districts, that really empowers cities and provides funds for the investment.
We have come to the witching hour, and I still see a lot of hands going up. I apologize that we have run out of time, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I can't emphasize enough how much we appreciate your active involvement and your being here tonight. There are 2 sessions that are coming up for the next topic of conversation, housing affordability. There's a flyer about this within your packet. At the bottom, you'll see that there's one on April 28th and one on the 30th at different times, one more during the day and one during the evening, just to capture different parts of the community, both at Lucy Stern and at the Elks Lodge. But I'd like to have you join me in thanking our panel again for taking the time and volunteering. This is the start of an important conversation about the future of our city, and I am glad that you're all a part of it. Please bring a couple more people to the next one, and we'll keep growing the conversation. Thank you so much. Have a good night.